Minister, when I spoke on this a couple of weeks ago when you were present in the House, we discussed a couple of things. So I want to try and keep my points low, as I only have about 5.5 minutes there. The first one I want to talk about is the Help to Buy scheme, and I feel I can actually talk about this because it's something that affects my generation. I'm 29 years of age, so I can't speak for Senator Gavin, but what I can speak for is that I know so many of my friends and people in my age bracket have benefited massively from the Help to Buy scheme in 2017. And I remember when I worked in this House as a member of staff and that Rent to Buy scheme was introduced in 2017, the same topic was said then, that it would drive up prices, that it would freeze people out of the market, that it would be no use in the first place. There's no empirical data whatsoever over the last 3 years to suggest that. And now that we're actually increasing it by another 10,000 to 30,000 euro, it's going to benefit even more people, people of my generation, to get on the property ladder for the first time. And in the last 3 years, it's actually benefited 19,000 people have been able to get on it. But what I would say, in terms of perhaps constructive criticism about it, Minister, is about the flexibility surrounding the 70%. And the reason I want to bring that up is, as I was left Dundalk this morning and drove up to this House to speak on this debate, I spoke with a friend of mine, Peter. And Peter and his wife are individuals who I believe fall through what I would call the legislative cracks around the Help to Buy scheme. And as I said, this is a constructive way to bring this up because I think it's something we can look into the future. So, for example, Peter and his wife are looking to buy a new build in Blackrock, just outside Dundalk in County Louth. And that costs at the minute €225,000 for a 3-bed end of terrace house. And in their circumstance, they're actually on one income. And the reason why they're on one income is because Peter's wife has been sick for the last 18 months. She is a qualified secondary school teacher, but she suffers from vestibular migraines, which means she suffers from dizziness and vertigo. And for the time being, will not be able to go back to work. Peter is actually in permanent employment in Dundalk, and they were approved for a mortgage of €152,000. Sorry, Lask Gairloch. The rules for the Help to Buy state that the loan-to-value ratio between the mortgage and the home value has to be 70%, and in this case they're sitting at 65%, which means they're unable to qualify for it. And Minister, I fully understand why the 70% is there in the first place, because it's going to stop people who can afford to buy a house outright from taking up the scheme. I absolutely accept that, and I know why it's there. But as you can see in the case, the individual case that I've raised here, I think we could perhaps have more flexibility around the 70% mark, because in the case of Peter and his wife, they're not able to buy this house outright. And the final thing about it is, and as he said to me on the car coming up this morning, he totally doesn't expect things to change this time around. He knows that. But he does believe, and asked me to convey it to this House, that perhaps in future, if we are ever to look at this again, that it is made slightly more flexible for individuals who fall so close to 70%. And he actually raised an issue of Deloitte there recently, where they took it to a tax appeals commission, and just they were on 69.89%, and just fell below the 70%, and we're still not able to get it. So it's just constructive criticism that I want to raise as a way to point out perhaps some of the cracks legislatively where it can fall through. The final thing that I want to talk about is actually what I raised with you 2 weeks ago when you were here, which was in relation to the TWSS. And the issue I raised as the then Minister was about how a family who were switching over accountants at the start of the year weren't on the pay system on February the 29th. They paid it all of their wages then on the 10th week. They were in employment throughout the whole thing, but they were the legislation was black and white. It was quite clear, and they weren't able to qualify for it. They will be able to qualify for this now because we have removed some of those restrictions to make it easier. And while that is very, very welcome for that family business indeed, I do have to just put it on the record of the House that it is marginally unfair that they were unable to claim for it previously, and perhaps that there was no recompense, for want of a better word, that they could claim it back at a later stage. And the final point within my last 60 seconds or so, Minister, to wrap up, is to be very brief about it. It's actually about the employers' PRSI, where a 0.5% rate of employers' PRSI will continue to apply for employments that are eligible for the subsidy. And, Minister, that represents quite a considerable saving, I'm sure you will agree, for the employer, in addition to the flat rate subsidy amounts per employee. So that's up to 11.05% on a full wage. So to conclude, Minister, what I seek to do today in my short amount of time with you is to really point out, and as my colleague Senator Darcy is absolutely correct, this is the most generous subsistence scheme since the foundation of the state. It cannot be snuffed at. And while I do respect constructive criticism, because in my 6 years in local politics and in this House, I am willing to work with everyone of both sides of the House, what I do not accept is opposition for opposition's sake. And unfortunately, in my very brief time in this House and on the national stage, it is something, unfortunately to me, that seems to be the norm and not the exception.